The medicine aisle looks completely full right now. Walk down it and you will see hundreds of bottles. But what most people do not realize is that the affordable version, the generic, the store brand, the family size bottle, that is the format that vanishes first. The brand name version sits there at twice the price, while the useful one quietly disappears. Right now, over 270 medications are in active shortage. 95% of the ibuprofen supply chain runs through one country. 70% of acetaminophen, 90% of hydrocortisone. You still have time, but the window is not permanent. Number 12. Ibuprofen. Generic and bulk formats. Most people treat ibuprofen like tap water. It has always been cheap. It has always been restocked. It will always be there. That assumption is exactly why this is the opening item on this list and not the last one. About 95% of the active ingredient in ibuprofen is sourced from China. That is not a rumor. That figure comes from data cited by Apollo's chief economist and backed by National Institutes of Health sourcing information. Generic drug manufacturers already operate on razor-thin margins. When tariffs raise their input costs, those manufacturers do not simply absorb the difference. In some cases, they exit the product entirely. The brand name version survives because higher margins allow it to. The store brand version at the warehouse store, the big bottle, the practical size, the one that makes sense for a household, that is the one that thins first. You will not see an empty ibuprofen shelf. You will see a full shelf of name brand bottles at 3 times the price and a substitution tag where the store brand used to be. The calm move is simple. Buy the generic in a practical family size before that is the only option left. Rotate it. Check the expiration date. This is a $5 fix right now that becomes an uncomfortable decision later. But pain and fever being covered is only the beginning, because the next item disappears even faster when a respiratory season and a shortage collide at the same time. Number 11. Acetaminophen, children's liquid formulations. Here is a mistake a lot of parents make. They wait until the child is already sick to run to the pharmacy. That is the exact moment when every other parent in the neighborhood is also running to the pharmacy. The 2022 to 2023 shortage of children's fever medicine was not theoretical. It was parents calling store after store, finding adult tablets in full supply and children's suspension bottles completely gone. The reason it happened then can happen again. Acetaminophen gets about 70% of its active ingredient from Chinese manufacturing. Children's liquid suspension is the most vulnerable format. It has a shorter shelf life than tablets, more complex manufacturing requirements, and lower profit margins. When demand spikes, it disappears before the adult version even notices the pressure. The dangerous alternative, trying to dose children with adult tablets, is not a safe substitute. That requires a conversation with a doctor, not a kitchen calculation. Keep one backup bottle per child in the correct formulation for their weight. Check the expiration date right now. Rotate annually. That one bottle could be the difference between a manageable sick night and a midnight drive to the 4th pharmacy. Fever and pain are covered, but what about infection? That is where the next item creates the biggest household gap of all. Number 10. Amoxicillin, oral suspension, pediatric. The FDA has officially documented 7 separate shortage events for amoxicillin since 2022. 7. And most families had no idea any of them were happening until they were standing at a pharmacy counter with a sick child and a valid prescription that nobody could fill. During the worst of those shortages, parents were calling 10, 12, 15 pharmacies trying to locate the oral suspension their child needed. The capsule version was often available. The liquid version, the one children can actually take, was not. Here is the structural problem. Nearly half of amoxicillin suspension production runs through a single region. India supplies most of the rest, but India itself sources roughly 70% of its own pharmaceutical ingredients from China. So a label that says "Made in India" is often one step removed from the same single-country dependency. The FDA officially marked the most recent oral suspension shortage as resolved in May 2025. Resolved is not the same as stable. Spot shortages were still occurring at individual pharmacies into early 2026, and the structural vulnerabilities that caused those 7 shortage events have not been rebuilt. Fall and winter respiratory season is exactly when those vulnerabilities get stress tested. Talk to your doctor now, before anyone is sick. Know which pharmacies in your area stock which formulations. Understand the difference between resolved on paper and reliable on the shelf. That awareness is what turns a frightening situation into a manageable one. Infection covered. But the next overlooked category is what happens when that infection brings inflammation you cannot touch. Number 9. Hydrocortisone cream, 1% OTC formula. Most people buy a product name, Cortade, or whatever the store brand rash cream is called, without ever reading what is actually doing the work inside it. The active ingredient doing that work is hydrocortisone 1%. And more than 90% of the global supply of hydrocortisone comes from China. That number puts it in the same vulnerability class as ibuprofen, but far fewer people know it because nobody thinks of rash cream as a supply chain sensitive item. They think of it as something that sits on the shelf forever and costs $3. That is exactly why it catches people off guard. During demand spikes, the large family-sized tube disappears first. What stays on the shelf is the small travel size, the premium version with added moisturizers, and the brand name option at double the price. A person with a poison ivy reaction, an eczema flare, or a persistent insect bite reaction does not want to be calling their dermatologist for an appointment that is 3 weeks out. Keep 1 or 2 backup tubes. Read the label and confirm the active ingredient is hydrocortisone 1%. The generic is chemically identical to the brand name. That detail alone saves money. But there is an anti-inflammatory category that disappears even faster, and most people never realize it serves 3 completely different household needs at once. Number 8. Diphenhydramine, generic antihistamine. Most households think antihistamine and immediately reach for Claritin or Zyrtec. Those are excellent second-generation options for daily allergy management. But diphenhydramine, the active ingredient in original Benadryl, is a different tool entirely, and most people are quietly underestimating how many things it covers. It is a fast-acting antihistamine for allergic reactions. It is also the active ingredient in most store-brand nighttime sleep aids. It is also one of the most commonly used remedies for nausea and motion sickness. That triple coverage means demand for this one active ingredient comes from 3 completely separate directions at once. When a shortage or a demand spike hits, the generic version gets cleared from all 3 categories simultaneously. The brand name Benadryl tends to survive because the margin supports it. The store brand antihistamine, sleep aid, and motion sickness tablet, all the same ingredient, all at a fraction of the price, those thin fast. Keep both options in the cabinet. A second-generation antihistamine like loratadine or cetirizine for daily use, and diphenhydramine for situations that need fast-acting relief. Generic is identical to brand name. The only difference is the price on the bottle. Now for the item most households completely ignore until it is urgently needed and nowhere to be found. Number 7. Loperamide, anti-diarrheal. Nobody wants to think about this one in advance. That is exactly the problem. Loperamide, the active ingredient in Imodium and every store brand anti-diarrheal, sits on pharmacy shelves completely ignored for months. And then a norovirus moves through the neighborhood, or there is a regional food recall, or a stomach bug hits the household at the worst possible time, and that shelf clears within hours. The World Health Organization includes loperamide on its essential medicines list. That is not a minor designation. Dehydration from prolonged diarrhea escalates quickly, especially in children and elderly adults. A manageable inconvenience becomes an ER consideration faster than most people expect once dehydration sets in. The small travel packs are the format that disappears first because they are the most convenient grab. The practical family-size bottle, the one that makes sense to have on hand, is what to keep in stock. This is a cheap, lightweight item with good shelf life. It is genuinely boring until the moment it matters. The next item on this list looks similar from a distance, but it covers a more serious situation and the format risk is even less obvious. Number 6. Oral rehydration salts, electrolyte packets. A lot of households think they have this covered because they have a bottle of sports drink in the fridge. They do not have it covered. Standard sports drinks have the wrong sodium to glucose ratio and too much sugar for genuine rehydration therapy. The clinical packet format, oral rehydration salts following the WHO glucose sodium formula, is a different product entirely. It is what hospitals recommend families have at home. It is what CDC, WHO, and the American Academy of Pediatrics have consistently pointed to for managing pediatric illness at home. A vomiting child with a fever and no IV access gets dangerous fast if the household is relying on Gatorade. The powder packet format, Pedialyte powder, generic ORS packets, drip drop, is the one that disappears during any respiratory illness surge. Because it is compact, light, and exactly what informed parents reach for first. It is also inconsistently stocked to begin with. It tends to live in a small corner of the health section rather than the main beverage aisle, which means even when restocks happen, they can be slow and incomplete. Buy the powder packet format. One box of 10 to 20 packets is inexpensive, lightweight, and has a shelf life measured in years. This is the item emergency physicians wish more families already had on hand when they come through the door. Now the list moves into the territory where most people have never considered looking, and the first one explains why a medicine cabinet that looks completely stocked can still completely fail. Number 5. Pseudoephedrine, actual decongestant. Here is the part most people miss, and it genuinely surprises almost everyone who hears it. The decongestant products on the open shelf at most pharmacies, the Sudafed PE, the Dayquil, the store brand cold and flu capsules, many of them contain phenylephrine as the active decongestant ingredient. In September 2023, an FDA advisory panel formally concluded that oral phenylephrine taken by mouth is no more effective than a placebo for nasal congestion. That panel's conclusion was unanimous. The products are still on the shelf. The ingredient is still listed, but the consensus among the advisory panel was that it does not work when taken orally. The actual effective decongestant, pseudoephedrine, is locked behind the pharmacy counter by federal law. You need to show ID. There are purchase limits. It requires asking specifically. Most people never do because the front shelf looks completely stocked. That is a format gap unlike any other on this list. The shelf is not thin. The shelf is full of a product that may not do what the buyer expects. If your household uses decongestants for sinus pressure, ear congestion, or colds that cannot drain, talk to your pharmacist. Ask specifically for pseudoephedrine-containing products. Understand the purchase limits. This is not about stockpiling. It is about knowing what actually works before you are already congested and standing in the aisle hoping the box does something. The next gap is easier to miss because it looks like a basic hygiene item rather than a medical vulnerability. Number 4. Antifungal creams, generic clotrimazole and miconazole. Athlete's foot, ringworm, nail fungus, yeast infections. These are not dramatic conditions. They are also not conditions that stay manageable if ignored long enough. And most people ignore them at the first sign because buying an antifungal cream feels like a non-urgent errand. The APIs for azole antifungals are largely imported. The store brand clotrimazole 1% cream is almost always the first to thin when any supply pressure hits. Large tubes go before small ones. Generic miconazole powder for foot and shoe treatment also becomes inconsistent before the brand name version does. Nail fungus requires 3 to 6 months of consistent treatment. A yeast infection that is not addressed quickly can involve secondary complications. Athlete's foot spreads between household members through shared surfaces. None of these conditions are minor inconveniences at the point when the right product is unavailable. During the COVID-era supply disruptions, antifungal products were among the categories that became quietly inconsistent. It did not make headlines. Nobody talked about the antifungal shortage, but the store brand tube was not on the shelf in the useful size in some areas. And the people who noticed it were the ones who had let their supply run out. A generic tube of clotrimazole is inexpensive and has solid shelf life. Keep one. It covers more situations than most people realize. The next item surprises people even more because it looks like a basic first aid supply, but most households have not actually checked whether theirs still works. Number 3. Topical antibiotic ointment. Generic triple antibiotic. Go check your medicine cabinet right now. Find the tube of antibiotic ointment. Look at the expiration date. A lot of households are going to find that their tube expired somewhere between 2 and 4 years ago. It has been sitting in the back of the cabinet since nobody thought to look. Bacitracin and polymyxin, the active ingredients in most triple antibiotic ointments, come from largely imported APIs. The generic large tube format disappears before brand name Neosporin during any shortage event. The travel-size single-use packets stay on the shelf because demand for the practical size goes first. The practical size is also what matters. A household that needs to treat a cut, a scrape, a burn, or a minor wound and reaches for the tube finds either an expired product that has lost efficacy or a tube that was used years ago and has about a millimeter of ointment left. A minor wound that goes untreated does not stay minor indefinitely. An infected wound that a household assumed it had covered is an ER visit that could have been a $5 tube of generic ointment. Check the expiration date. Replace it if it is expired. Buy the large tube generic format. This is one of the simplest fixes on the entire list. The next item is the one that most households have thought about least, and it is the one that changes how every other item on this list works. Number 2. Naproxen sodium, the third pain reliever. Most households feel covered for pain management once they have ibuprofen and acetaminophen. That feels like redundancy. It is not. Naproxen sodium, the active ingredient in Aleve, is a completely different NSAID from ibuprofen. It has a longer effective window, 8 to 12 hours compared to 4 to 6 hours for ibuprofen. It has a different safety profile that can be more appropriate when ibuprofen is contraindicated. And it is the only long-duration OTC NSAID available without a prescription. In a shortage scenario where ibuprofen generics are unavailable and acetaminophen has already been used, a household with naproxen sodium has a genuine third option. A household without it has nothing. During shortage events, naproxen generic thins quietly. Demand volume is lower than ibuprofen, so the disappearance is less dramatic. But the large format generic bottle goes first, just like every other item on this list. A generic bottle of naproxen sodium costs under $10. It does not need to be a large quantity, it just needs to exist as a third-tier option before it is the only option left. Here is the part most people miss. Everything on this list assumes one thing, that someone in the household actually knows what active ingredient they need and what format they need it in. That is what number 1 is really about. Number 1, generic store brand versions, the format itself. This is not a single item. It is the invisible rule that connects every item on this list. And it is the reason a fully stocked looking pharmacy aisle can still fail a prepared household. The format that disappears first is always the generic, the store brand, the practical size, the affordable version. Brand names survive shortages because their margins allow them to. Generic manufacturers operate on margins so thin that a tariff increase, an API supply disruption, or even a sustained demand spike can force them to reduce production or exit the product entirely. What remains on the shelf is the expensive version, the recognizable label, the small bottle, the premium format. The one that costs 3 times more for the exact same active ingredient in the exact same concentration. Most people shop by brand name. They reach for Tylenol and do not think about acetaminophen. They reach for Advil and do not think about ibuprofen. They reach for Neosporin and do not check whether the generic tube has the same active ingredients at a third of the price. That habit is harmless when shelves are fully stocked. It becomes a problem when the category still has product, but the affordable, practical format is gone. There are two shelf signals to watch for. The first is the store brand slot, showing a substitution tag or an empty space while the brand name sits untouched beside it. The second is a full shelf of travel size and single-use options, while the family size practical format is missing. Those are not signs that the product is unavailable. They are signs that the version most households actually need is already gone. The real shortage in this country right now is not always in the category. It is in the affordable, correct format, practical size version of the category. Every drug on this list is technically available somewhere right now, in a brand name small bottle format at twice the normal price. The generic family size is what requires a decision before the demand spike arrives. Read the label. Look at the active ingredient, not the brand name. Know that generic equals the same active ingredient equals the same result. Buy by ingredient and practical size, not by the name on the front of the box. That one habit, applied consistently across everything in this medicine cabinet, changes the entire picture. The households that came through the 2022 to 2023 shortage without panic were not the ones with the most dramatic supplies. They were the ones who had already bought the boring, cheap, practical generic before it became urgent. They were not smarter, they were just earlier. A shortage does not begin when the shelf is empty. It begins when the version you actually use is gone. The shelf can look full right up until the moment you need what is no longer on it. Add one item to your next trip. Buy the generic. Check the expiration date. Rotate the stock. Do that quietly before everyone else remembers these items exist.